Hey there, my name is Connor, and I think you should play Monster Hunter. Now I'm going to say this right from the top. This isn't me shilling for or endorsing brand new shiny game Monster Hunter Wilds. I don't have brand new shiny game Monster Hunter Wilds. Brand new shiny game Monster Hunter Wilds might have a couple issues with it. You know, it's looking like it might be a shred too easy. It's looking like the PC port is pretty badly optimized at the moment. We'll see where things go, obviously. You know, still expecting to like it, but you don't have to buy big new brand new thing. There's 20 years of old thing that is all really, really good that you should probably go out and play if you like good video games. There's a lot of Monster Hunter, like a lot of it. Some of it's easy to get your hands on than others. The big ones are World and Rise and Wilds coming out, and there's Generations Ultimate if you got a Switch. Everything else, though, a little tougher to get your hands on, but if you know what an emulator is, well, then you know what an emulator is. And then there's also the psycho freaky MMO one that you can install on your computer if you want to go into that thing, but don't start with Frontier. Don't start with Frontier. Don't do it. Don't start with Frontier. That's a bad idea. Don't start. But why should you play it? Why should you play Monster Hunter? In general. That's what I'm talking about. Why do you play them in general? Why does it matter? What's the appeal? Why are they good? Why is it that this franchise, issues and all, every individual game having its own problems and its own critiques and things that are warrant discussing about? Why play them? Why am I talking about this? Why did I dedicate a channel to them? Why? Monster Hunter is a franchise that encourages you to get better. It teaches very well. It respects your time. It is incredibly well designed. It is one of the best core gameplay loops ever created. It has some of the best thought out creatures ever put to fiction. It's got incredibly engaging gameplay. It is incredibly forgiving with customization. It is very accommodating for you to play it how you like. There's just so much to enjoy with even the most flawed entries or the best entries, the most obscure ones, the most annoying, old, oddly put together ones. I don't think there's a single bad one in the bunch. Better than others, yeah, for sure. But why play them? The core of Monster Hunter is spectacular. It is a very simple formula, yet probably the best loot system I've ever played. You go out on a quest. You select a target. You pick out a monster that you want to fight. You engage in combat. You don't do all that great. Maybe you win, maybe you lose. You get some parts back and you have the ability to craft some gear. But if you want to craft that gear, you're gonna have to go out and kill more of that monster. But you didn't do so good that first time, did you? You didn't clear that fast enough. You didn't get all the part breaks you needed or anything like that. You got tossed around a little bit, so you go back out and you fight that monster again. But this time you kind of know how the patterns work. He's going to throw out a fireball after he throws out a tail whip or something like that. Or he's going to fly backwards after he roars or something. You kind of start to subconsciously know what the guy is going to do. And you start to realize, hey, I need to chop off the tail, but the tail's usually off the ground a lot. But after he does this attack, it's a little bit closer to the ground, so I could go after the tail for that move. Or I could pick a different weapon with some better range. And then you start getting the part breaks more consistently. And you start getting the clear times a little bit faster. And a little bit faster. And then you start to kind of pick up on a couple of things. Like, oh, well, this monster flies a lot, so I can use this item that blinds it to knock it out of the sky. Or if I check the armor stats of this monster, it looks like he has an incredibly persistent weakness to thunder damage. Maybe I go and fight this earlier monster who does the thunder element and has some thunder weapons. And maybe I can get a better clear time if I go at it like that. And then your clear times start to get a little bit faster. And you really start to know what the monster's gonna do. And you know what the animations that lead up to the attacks look like. And you know what the sound design to lead up to certain attacks look like. And you know which attacks are gonna follow up into which ones. And you find the weapon that's very comfortable with dealing with that monster's moveset. And then you kind of continue on and you go, hey, this monster's flying a lot and kicks up a lot of wind. But there's these skills on this other armor piece that negates the effects of wind pressure. Maybe I want to take that. But this monster poisons me with his claws, so maybe I want to take these items with me that can get rid of poison automatically so I don't have to just thug through the damage that I take from poison over time. And you start to just one by one, bit by bit, you build up a little bit of insight into what the monsters do, how they follow through with things, all that kind of stuff. And your clear times continue to get faster, and you start to build up a bigger roster of gear, and you're taking on stronger and stronger monsters, and your approach gets smarter and smarter. Now you're starting to look for things. You're starting to look for the patterns. You know not even that the patterns exist, but to just kind of wait a little while and see what the monster does, and kind of tool around with the gear, and maybe kind of assess what the monster looks like to see if they're really fast or really slow, really bulky, elementally driven, more of a flyer, stuff like that, and pick and choose your weapons and your accommodations and your gear around that. You read the monster descriptions a little bit beforehand, realize what they can do and bring some items beforehand. You go in and you get your ass kicked and you do a little learning and you figure out what you gotta do next, and it's just bit by bit and piece by piece you learn. Some games are better at teaching that than others. Some of the modern ones I think are a little bit too forgiving in that category, but Monster Hunter is really good about just teaching you how to play it. And then, as you start to take down those more difficult monsters progressively over and over and over again, your gear starts to get better, and you get better skills, more defensive skills, more attack skills, higher defense stats, better elemental resistances. You're starting to build up a whole armory of different swords and bowguns and bows and axes and hammers, and a whole bunch of different pieces of armor that all have different specialties and different counter mechanisms and different resistances and all that stuff. And as the game progresses and you get into the end level bosses, what you do is you start piecing together all these sets and these different contingencies and these different plans and these different item loadouts to deal with the individual abilities and gimmicks and quirks of all these different monsters one by one by one. Or, you just run like critical boost and weakness exploit and attack boost and all that kind of stuff. And you just min-max your attack because you're lame. That's fine. You can do that too. Running meta's fine. But just Monster Hunter it has more to offer, Usually, it really wants you to engage with the gimmicks of its monsters. It kind of wants you to get bullied around a little bit. It wants you to try to kind of experiment with stuff like that. And it's rewarding. I mean, it's fun in general, and that's the kind of the thing. If you don't want to engage with all that, if that sounds like a lot of busy work, you don't have to. You're not going to die if you don't. Monster Hunter is usually pretty damn good, with the exception in a couple of places, whether it's necessary or not, to just kind of let you do really whatever you want. If you don't want a hard counter build, you don't have to hard counter build. You can go for the most damage as humanly possible in the game, and that's satisfying for some people. You can run the same weapon for the entire game, or you can go with better matchups if you want to. That's entirely on you. And the cool thing about it is there's really no penalty for doing whatever you want to do. Swapping around between weapons and items and armor sets is free. There's no skill tree in this game. There's no investment. You're not dropping points into anything. There's no cost if you unequip a weapon. In some of the newer games, you can just swap around weapons at camp now. But yeah, it's not like you're investing in strength points to make your greatsword stronger, and then if you swap to dual blades, you've kind of screwed over your build. There is no build in that sense, not like a statistical boosting type of thing or like a skill tree type of thing like some other RPGs. If you strip all your armor and gear off of your body and your weapon, your damage is all the way back down and you have no skills. Everything is based on what you put on yourself. Everything is equipable. So there's no penalty, no nothing. If you're running Gunlance for the entirety of the game and then you're like, I'm not really liking Gunlance anymore, I want to go to Longsword now, there's no penalty. And you're done. Now you're a longsword player, and now you're learning longsword, and now you're learning the fights that you just learned with the gunlance, but you're learning with the longsword, and you're learning your new timings and your new matchups, and maybe you like a fight a little bit more or a little bit less, and now you're running some different skills to accommodate for the strengths and weaknesses of the longsword over the gunlance, and there's no penalty, there's no nothing. You just kind of do whatever you want. Yeah, there's a monster or two out there that are very, very punishing if you don't play a specific way, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that those super punishing bosses exist, because sometimes the monster really does just kind of want you to play its game, and that's always been a thing. But yeah, for the most part, you can kind of do whatever you want. You can go with more challenging options, you can go with more comforting options, there's abilities for you to turn on more healing, to turn off more healing, to let your companion with you, give a lot of support or give less support, give damage and buffs and all that kind of stuff, or stick with more straight up conventional healing. There's different items you can bring, especially in a game like World, where you have different mantles and different boosters that can regenerate health or help you dodge attacks, and you can run them or you can not run them. You can do kind of whatever you want with them. your experience is very, very customizable in Monster Hunter, with little to no setbacks whatsoever. Some games are just a little bit more expedient than others, but none of them are really going to punish you if you want to just swap in what you're doing on a dime, completely overhaul yourself. You just need to pay the material costs to get new gear. That's about it. That's the only downside, is just you gotta buy more stuff. You gotta hunt more monsters and get more parts to make more weapons and armor. And Monster Hunter's got a lot of content too. There's really not many games that have a roster that's below like 50 monsters. There's usually a lot of stuff you can fight. And like I was saying earlier, usually these monsters really want to teach you. So fighting a monster the first time is not the same thing as fighting the monster the 10th time. So if there's a game with like 70 fights to learn, especially with some of the games that had expansions or more advanced versions of them eventually sold, that's like 50, 60, 70, 80 monsters that you fight again and again and again and again to learn how to fight them and to get better at them and to make gear out of them. And past a certain point in the franchise, around like Monster Hunter 4 or 4 Ultimate, we've kind of gotten to this era where the game has these systems built in where you can kind of just keep playing past the story and past making all the armor sets and whatnot. There'll be different facilities and mechanisms and mechanics and whatnot for you to get progressively better and better gear, because there's progressively stronger and stronger monsters you gotta face down. So what you're doing is you're engaging in these new systems and you're chasing better decorations and better skill slots and stronger and stronger weapons, and you're grinding to put augments and upgrades and all this stuff and high level statistical boosts on your stuff. And it's really just kind of an excuse to keep playing and to keep learning and to keep getting better and to keep getting better sets and to craft stronger and stronger things. Some of the older games don't have an endgame loop like this. You kind of just beat the final boss and you make all the armor sets, and then you get to fun hunt if you want, but it's a nice, cleaner, more simpler stopping point that doesn't have a very complex and intricate endgame. But if you're loving the games and you want an excuse, you want a car to chase, you want to just kind of keep playing just for the sake of keep playing, a lot of the games from the last 10 years have these basically kind of just endless end games that you can play forever if you enjoy the gameplay, which is really cool. It gives you something to do. And these monsters, man, that you're going to be fighting, combat-wise, design-wise, craftsmanship-wise, they're just some of the best in the business, honestly. They're ridiculously cool. There's so much thought that goes into pretty much every single individual one of them. There's a really interesting spectrum of Monster Hunter monsters, with some of them being these enormously grounded, thought-out, animalistic animals that could so much as function in our actual real world, probably, if evolution went a certain way, all the way to these incredibly fantastical, super awesome, cool factor monsters that kind of push the boundaries of physics in a lot of places. But like I said, there's a spectrum to it. So even the more grounded monsters usually have some really interesting abilities or gimmicks to them, or do some really neat and gnarly attacks. And even some of the more fantastical and amazing wow factor monsters have some legitimate thought into how they would function and how their powers might be able to work, with some suspension of disbelief for sure. But there's a spectrum all the way from this basically just an Oviraptor in Kuliyaku, all the way to an Elder Dragon in Volstrax that can basically turn an element in its body into jet fuel and go flying around at the speed of sound. And they're both Monster Hunter monsters. Somehow the spectrum is so well executed that they kind of just both fit. They both work. You know, Kuliyaku is an incredibly intelligent monster that can tear up like rocks and exploding rocks and pots out of the ground and use them as tools and weapons and use them to defend himself like a shield. No animal's using it quite like that. You know, that's kind of fantastical, but for the most part, he's a feathery, raptory dinosaur. He goes around and he steals eggs. He doesn't do anything that's all that crazy. He's just a raptor guy going around doing raptor things. But yeah, he's a little bit more intelligent than a real raptor would be, and he's using like Stone Age tools, and he's using shields, and but then again, you have rocket-powered Volstrax, and they painted him silver so he would reflect sunlight a little bit to protect his skin, and he has some built-in shock absorbers to protect himself from the impacts of him landing. It probably still wouldn't physically allow him to survive, but they thought of it, and they modeled him after birds of prey and how he's built and how his facial structure works so that he can kind of dive like a falcon and hunt from the water and stuff like that. Every monster in the franchise basically has some level of unbelievability credibility and some level of believability. And, the developers really didn't need to think of all that stuff. You have this dude, Glavenus, who's a Carnotaurus with a fire sword tail and, like, Optimus Prime colors. They didn't need to think of a way to make Glavenus actually function, but they make it so that he, like, consumes the debris off of his tail and ingests it and kind of functions like a coal engine, where he uses these bits of debris and rubble and dirt and rock to fuel these flame organs within his body so that he can breathe fire and ignite his tail up into a big flaming blade that he can use to cleave monsters in half with. They didn't need to think of that. They could have just had a dinosaur with a fire tail and everyone would have been perfectly fine with it, and they could have named it like Scorch Brute or Bladosaurus or something like that. I don't know, but no, he's a Glavenus. The scholars in the world called him a Glavenus, and this is how he functions, and this is how he does Glavenus things. It's sick. There's a whole spectrum of this. Monster Hunter monsters are super well thought out. They have ecology, they have behaviors, they have stuff going on in the background that we don't normally see. They have habits, they have routines, they have territory, they have places in their ecology, they have rivalries with other animals, they have other animals that they trounce, they have prey, they have places that they frequent to go eating, they mark their territory, they have children, they take craps out in the woods. They're animals. They're legitimately animals. They're not just like Final Fantasy. Even the ones that we call Final Fantasy monsters, like Magnamalo or something like that, who's a samurai demon tiger, he still has hunting habits, and he still has interactions with what he eats, and he still has hierarchies within his own species. It's really sick. And then combat-wise, they're almost all pretty fantastic. It's you're every once in a while you're gonna get a bad Monster Hunter monster, for sure. You are. There's someone with a gimmick that's just too overtuned or doesn't do enough, or their hit zones suck or something like that, but pretty consistently they're exceptionally fun to fight. They've got combos, and they've got mix-ups, and they've got projectiles, and they've got gimmicks that you gotta learn or try to build around or try to avoid. They're all pretty unique in their own way. They have different alterations on flying around or tail slams or fire breath or thunder shocks. Some of them are god level and powerful. Some of them are just kind of dipshits who are rolling around and attacking you and swiping at you with claws and fangs. Some of them are poisonous monsters. Some of them are trying to like hunt you like a spider, or trying to like put you to sleep and paralyze you so they can attack you like that. Others are just trying to brute force you and run you over and crush you in oblivion. Some of them are trying to eat you alive. Some of them are trying to incinerate you. Some of them are trying to fake you out. Some of them are trying to kind of outfox you and box you out and kind of lure you into traps. Some of them are just trying to smash you into oblivion. They all fight differently. They all have their own different movesets. They all have their own different takes on certain gimmicks. They all use different elements in different ways. They have different methods of hunting. They have different patterns that you have to learn, especially in the modern games where they recycle animations a lot less and they can really kind of hone in on more complicated behaviors and whatnot. No two fights really feel alike anymore, which makes it feel extra awesome, like I was saying earlier, when you're learning the gimmicks and learning the tells and learning the patterns and all that kind of stuff, that now you have, like I said, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 fights by the time you get to a Master Rank expansion, that they're all similar, and you have to learn all of them, and they all have their own tells, and they all have their own sound cues, and they all have their own gimmicks, and they all have their own stuff you got to avoid, or stuff that you try to thug through, and different weapon matchups that you like or don't like. Even the monsters who are variations of other monsters are at a point now where they have their own moves and their own behaviors and their own patterns and stuff like that. Yeah, that's another thing they thought up, is they have monsters that are like direct relatives of one another. It's a way for them to save on resources for sure. It makes padding out the roster with some extra members nice and easy, and kind of saves them some money while also boosting up the numbers of their boss battles a little bit. But as the series went on, they took that process really similarly, and they work with monster subspecies that work in different environments. So you have like a population of one animal that went to another place, so they started developing new traits and working with different elements and whatnot, and learning new gimmicks and all that kind of stuff. Or you have variations where you have monsters that undergo certain traumas or certain natural processes, or they're stuck in the middle of a process, or it's a special individual of a species that kind of underwent a transformation that others don't normally go through, and they gain access to different abilities, or the process in their natural abilities change. So you'll have maybe like a Gore Magala, which has a process where it melts into a Shigaru Magala, but you'll get this variant in a chaotic Gore where it didn't molt all the way and is kind of stuck half through, and has this Motley Crue amalgamation mashup of its moveset, which is really cool. Or you'll have a Savage Devil Joe, which is like a normal Devil Joe, but it kind of went nuts off of its own power and has more spastic and more erratic and more harrowing and more dangerous use of the dragon element and stuff like that. You'll have super duper rare individuals like the deviants and the rare species, which, yeah, you fight them like whenever you want. They're not actually rare in an in-game context, but they're supposed to be these either natural born or once in a lifetime occurring versions of these monsters that have these incredibly powerful abilities to them that kind of take some of the more mid-game level monsters and turn them into these hyper end-game challenges. If you have the Wraths like Rathalos and Rathian, who are these mid-game level hunts that you're usually pretty used to and pretty well accustomed to, but then you get into the rare species of them, and the Silver Rathalos and the Gold Rathian, who have denser armor and these hellfire mechanics and far more dangerous fire attacks and better combos and better cancels and all that kind of stuff. So you have these variations that can not only interact with different environments, but they're also able to kind of take these monsters that you're really used to and turn them into higher level threats. It's really fun to kind of see how far these monsters that you're really accustomed to can be pushed, and they just think of all this crazy stuff that they never ever had to think of, and it's cool. It's awesome. It's really, really fun to just learn all these different fights and these matchups and to go at them in different ways and to throw different builds at the same monsters to learn kind of what you like and what you don't like, or just build the best build possible that you can make in the game with the best attack stats and the best critical chance and all that kind of stuff, and abusing certain mechanics to see just how fast you can beat the toughest monsters in the game and to shave down your timer that much faster and that much faster. Maybe that's where you get your enjoyment from, and you can do that in Monster Hunter. And the other sick thing is that every Monster Hunter game is pretty different. Especially nowadays, they all have their own gimmicks and their own tools, and they don't usually like to recycle a ton of them either. So you have Monster Hunter Tri that is underwater combat, and you have jumping attacks in Monster Hunter 4. Monster Hunter Rise and Monster Hunter Generations have these kind of flashy, stylized anime attacks. And Monster Hunter World has these mantles and the clutch claw that you can use to wrangle onto monsters and throw them into walls and whatnot. And you have just all these different things that all the games do differently, and there's less flashy gameplay gimmicks too, like Monster Hunter Dose has these seasons that kind of change monster behaviors and who spawns where and what kind of materials drop more frequently in different places, and every single game is different. It's not like a Call of Duty type of situation where you really kind of, well, maybe they're a little bit better about it now. I don't want to slander COD that much and be unfair, but it's just not the same game every time. Whatever you pick up, some of them are easier to pick up than others, but you're getting a different experience every single time, really. You're getting something different to learn. You're getting some different roster of monsters to fight and to learn against. The roster of weapons has been really consistent, but it's a different game every time. So you can really kind of, if you're like one, you can pick up another one and you'll have probably a similarly good yet still different and legitimately unique experience. It's still gonna be Monster Hunter every single time, and that core is enormously solid to the point where even the most flawed Monster Hunter games are still exceptionally fun and really well put together titles, but they're all still unique, and you can still play legitimately all of them and feel like you've got a different experience every single time. It makes borderline the entire catalog of Monster Hunter games worth playing. Yeah, if you're brand new, then you might want to start with the more modern ones. They're a bit more accommodating, but I would totally recommend going back and trying out the old ones if you can manage to get your hands on them physically, which is a little harder to get, or if you have a good enough PC and want to kind of go into the emulation route, that's perfectly fine if you want to do that. That's the only way to play some of them right now at this point, which is kind of unfortunate. I'm kind of hoping we're going to get some re-releases at some point. And the cool thing is, man, that there's like a weapon for everybody too. So I talked about the fact that you can kind of just pick up and play whatever you want and swap around between them. With Monster Hunter, you're basically getting a different game for every weapon that you pick up, because every weapon in every game, especially nowadays with them getting more complicated, it basically has their own skill floors and skill ceilings, and they have a whole bunch of different play styles. So there's long range stuff that's like the bow guns, there's long range but a little bit faster and more maneuverable like the bow, there's quicker, more actiony, combo oriented hack and slash with very nimble dodging like the sword and shield and the dual blades, there's more complex systems like the charge blade, there's heavier, more timing and patience based gameplay with like things like the greatsword and the hammer, there's support damage oriented gameplay for team play kind of like the hunting horn, there's aggressive defense with stuff like the lance and the gun lance. There's weapons that are more counter-oriented and more about turning the monster's attacks against them, like the longsword. Every single weapon really kind of changes an encounter completely, because the kit of your weapon is going to interact with the kit of the monster in different ways. Some of the matchups aren't going to work out particularly well for you, because that's just kind of how things work out. But you can tackle the same monster like 14 different ways and learn 14 different matchups against the same monster, essentially. And again, some of these rosters go up to like 80. So if you want to learn every single monster against every single weapon, there are so many just endless bounties of combinations that you can swap between, and you can learn the intricacies of and learn which matchups you like and you don't like. And it's just going to consistently keep the game feeling fresh and feeling different as you learn the skill floors and the skill ceilings of your weapon and how they match up with the movesets of the monsters, or what works well and what doesn't work well. And it just makes this boundless territory for experimentation and trying things out and just kind of figuring out what you like. There's so much stuff that goes into these games, even the most flawed ones of them. It makes them all worth playing. It makes it a series worth trying out. And as a lot of people are probably looking to get into Monster Hunter Wilds fresh, might be interested in the series as a whole, I hope this kind of made you want to try out the games. Just kind of listening to me babble for, I don't know, like a half hour about how cool these games are. I hope that encouraged you to maybe try to check them out. Any of them. I don't care. Don't play the new one if you don't want to. If you're a veteran and you don't want to play the new one, go ahead, don't play the new one. If you want to play the old ones, go play the old ones. I'm talking about Monster Hunter in general, stuff that I find true about this entire franchise as a whole, whichever individual problems you have with individual entries. There is a Monster Hunter out there that I think you're gonna like. If you like action games, if you like games that challenge you, if you like cool biology and cool lore with fictional animals, if that interests you, if games with a lot of customization, a lot of choices interest you, if good sword combat interests you, all that kind of stuff, if social experiences with other players interest you, you're gonna like Monster Hunter. It's one of the best franchises just ever constructed. And if you're already a set Monster Hunter fan, you knew all this and you're just listening to me, well, you're welcome for the confirmation bias, I suppose. But yeah, no, there's a big storm of interest in Monster Hunter with Wilds coming out, and I don't have a review copy to talk about, but I wanted to put out a video anyway, and I don't even care if you play Wilds. I want you to play Monster Hunter. In general, I don't give a fuck which one. Go play one. They're really, 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 really good. This has been CR-Volcanic or Connor. I'll see you around.
Shout out to all the patrons, and special shout out to Certified Rajang Hater, Dat Boy Doin Da Ding, Kets, Lander Moon, Nihilist Chimerax, Peaberry, Psychotic Jester, Shaggy Grizzly, Sir Newt Newt, Stromlin, Call Sign Shadow, I Think I Stole Your Sandwich, Pecco Plush, and Sir SS Jacob. Thank you very much, everyone.